Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. United States President Donald Trump's tariff flip-flops have kept global markets on the edge. Trump, who refers to himself as the tariff king and makes no qualms about using it as a negotiating tactic, have signed executive orders levying tariffs in the past only to impose a pause on them. Days later, this week was no different. The Trump administration's tariffs on Mexican, Canadian and Chinese imports went into effect on Tuesday, the 4th of March. This exposed most Mexican and Canadian goods to 25% tariffs, while China faced a cumulative 20% levy. On the same day, he delivered an unapologetic speech before the US Congress in what was the longest State of the Union address in recent history. Trump summed up that it was payback time for countries that have used tariffs against America for decades. He also reiterated that reciprocal tariffs will come into effect in April, and that would be the 2nd of April. Going a step further, Trump explained why he did not choose April 1st as the date.
This system is not fair to the United States and never was, and so on April 2nd, I wanted to make it April 1st, but I didn't want to be accused of April Fool's Day. That's not, just one day was cost us a lot of money. But we're going to do it in April. I'm a very superstitious person.
24 hours later, he doled out a one-month reprieve to the US's three biggest automakers. The breather was, however, on Mexican and Canadian vehicles and auto parts imported through the North American Trade Pact. The White House said that they did not want the automakers, General Motors, Ford, Stellantis, to be at an economic disadvantage. And last evening, he offered a one-month reprieve to Canadian and Mexican goods covered under the North American Trade Agreement. As per a White House official, about 50% of Mexican imports and 38% of Canadian imports are covered by the trade agreement. It's important to highlight here that Trump's tariff exceptions excluded those imposed on China. Subsequently, we learned that the Trump administration has sought a zero-tariff regime for almost all goods being traded with India, barring agriculture products. The demand from the US government comes close on the heels of Tesla gearing up to enter India. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal held high-level trade talks with his US counterparts in Washington, D.C. However, it is unlikely that India will get any concessions from the impending reciprocal tariffs. India's External Affairs Ministry has confirmed that India and the US are in the process of advancing negotiations on a trade agreement.
The two governments are in the process of advancing discussions on a multi-sector bilateral trade agreement. And as you would have seen in a joint statement also, I would like to repeat what we had mentioned there. Our objective through the BTA is to strengthen and deepen India-US two-way trade across goods and services, increase market access, reduce tariff and non-tariff barriers, and deepen supply chain integration between the two countries.
We're now joined by Mark Linscott, former assistant U.S. trade representative under the first Trump administration. Mark, thank you very much for joining us. How do you read the fact that Donald Trump first threatened, then imposed, then rolled back, paused tariffs? Does this indicate that somewhere economic reality is dawning on the administration?
Well, first of all, it's great to see you, Parikshit, and always great to join you in a discussion on U.S.-India trade. Frankly, it's difficult to track everything that goes on day by day and read ahead the tea leaves on what might come. We had day one of the Trump administration on January 20th, a threat to impose tariffs. In fact, that didn't happen. There were a number of presidential memorandums that laid out reports that would be delivered to the president with some delays in the imposition of tariffs. Finally, we had this action against China and Mexico and Canada. A very substantial action, and the markets reacted quite significantly. And there were reports of the automakers being highly concerned about the immediate impacts of those tariffs. In fact, 24 hours later, we had a change of heart, I guess, and a suspension of those tariffs for 30 days. I'm not sure what might happen during those 30 days, whether it's an opportunity for negotiation, for further agreements, but there's been a reprieve. So looking ahead, it's very difficult to assess what might happen. And I'm just pleased that Minister Goyal was in Washington. I think that was the right step to take to meet with his counterparts, the U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer and Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick. I think they have gotten off to a good start, and we'll see what happens in the next month and beyond.
Right. The only thing is, Mark, we've not heard anything formally from the Indian side on the talks so far. No pictures, no statements either so far. But we heard Howard Lutnick right now. He was speaking at the India Today summit in Delhi, and there he said, we cannot be discussing things product by product with India. We need to do something very broad, something at a macro level, something that is big and brings duties on American products down significantly. Do you get a sense that here the United States and Howard Lutnick is actually indicating that they want 0-for-0 tariffs with India across product lines?
Yeah, well, in fact, I have not heard 0 from anybody specifically in the administration. I've heard reports on the Indian side anticipating that possibility or that position from the United States. I think what's more clear is that there's a focus on reciprocal tariffs, and there are calculations being made on the average level of Indian tariffs, the average level of U.S. tariffs, and an expectation that the gap in those average levels of tariffs will be eliminated. Otherwise, there will be action on the part of the administration. So I'm not sure that it's 0-for-0. It's more a focus on reciprocity and tariffs being roughly the same, roughly equivalent. But the bigger picture, as Secretary Lutnick pointed out, is negotiations for a big deal, for a bilateral trade agreement, a BTA, as agreed by Prime Minister Modi and President Trump when Prime Minister Modi was here only a few weeks back. That's the real deal. And I anticipate it could cover virtually any sector and address virtually any trade barrier. I'm quite bullish on the prospects for that. I think it will be difficult. It will take time. But I think that's the big game. In the meantime, we may have tariffs applied, but the important thing is that they continue negotiations.
Right. We have been hearing that possibly the U.S. administration may want 0-for-0 tariffs on all products, excluding agriculture. But how do you feel things will progress eventually? Will there be certain product lines that U.S. will have in mind that they definitely want tariffs to come down, or they will say that you bring down overall average tariffs to this particular level and the average tariffs between India and U.S. have to be the same?
Yeah, I think that's the case, that there is an expectation that the average tariffs, the average U.S. tariffs and the average Indian tariffs are roughly equivalent. I think it's seen as the ball being in India's court, in Minister Goyal's court, to come back with a proposal that could realize that objective. Ideally, that could happen in the next few weeks. I mean, President Trump, in his address to the Congress, highlighted April 2nd as the date on which he will impose tariffs. We'll see. We've heard dates announced before and then delays and imposition of tariffs, but that currently seems to be the plan. Again, it's a bit of a wait and see of what India can do, what it can offer on cuts in tariffs. Not necessarily 0-for-0. I do think that there will be an eye to specific goods, specific sectors where there is a real possibility of U.S. export interests. It may be automobiles. I certainly think it will be agriculture. It could be chemicals. It could be manufacturing. Those will be the sectors on which there will be some focus.
All right. We heard reports about Tesla, how Tesla may actually be looking for zero tariffs, and the US administration may be pushing for zero tariffs on automobiles and Tesla cars being exported to India. Do you think that is a possibility? Because India wants Tesla to manufacture in India. But with the current mood in America and Donald Trump's open message to India that India wanting Tesla to manufacture there is very unfair, and they should be bringing down tariffs on US automobiles. Do you think in the current circumstances it's difficult for Tesla to commit to manufacturing and they would rather just enter India via the import route?
Well, I wouldn't venture into calculations by Tesla on how they enter the Indian market, whether it's through investment or it's through exports from the United States or other manufacturing sites. I think the point is that Indian tariffs on automobiles are very high, 100% or more, and there's an expectation that those tariffs come down. Sure, ideally 0%. I mean, that's what any exporter would like to face. I think the U.S. tariff on autos is in the range of 2.5%. Perhaps that would do the trick in terms of being able to reach agreement specifically on the auto sector. But the bigger point, again, is that there's an expectation that average tariffs across all sectors are more in line with the level of U.S. tariffs. And, I recognize that there have been negotiations in the World Trade Organization, the WTO, for many decades on tariffs. They eventually collapsed, and there was no new tariff deal over the last decade and a half on tariffs. But this is outside the WTO. This is a bilateral impetus to reach agreement on tariffs.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark, for joining us. It's been a very interesting discussion. Clearly, there have been talks between Howard Lutnick, Jamieson Greer, and Piyush Goyal this week. We'll hear more on that in the coming days. Let's see if the two countries can reach a deal in the next few months. Always a pleasure having you here on Global Eye. Time for a short break, but coming up, European Union leaders have backed new defense spending plans aimed at freeing up 800 billion euros for the continent's security. A special discussion with Mohan Kumar, former diplomat and dean at O.P. Jindal Global University, when we return. Let's shift focus to Europe now. The European Union has approved to boost defense spending by 800 billion euros under the Rearm Europe plan. This amidst mounting rift between Europe and the Trump administration. The move also comes after US President Trump revoked all military funding to Ukraine after a public spat between him and Ukrainian President Zelensky in the White House. EU members have also pledged $16 billion additional funding to Ukraine at an emergency defense summit held in Brussels. The Commission's President, von der Leyen, hailed this move as a watershed moment for the bloc. To understand the agreement better, we're joined by Mohan Kumar, former ambassador to France and also dean at O.P. Jindal Global University. Ambassador Kumar, thank you very much for joining us. This was an emergency summit held in Brussels. 27 leaders agreed to boost EU defense spending. Do you think all the member states will eventually be able to agree on a package of this kind? As of now, theoretically, they have endorsed it.
Thank you very much for having me. I think that's the million-dollar question, Parikshit, because it's one thing for the Commission to take a decision on paper and to say that this is more of virtue signaling, if you like, because this is a moment of reckoning for the European Union. They have been very badly sidelined in the conflict on Ukraine. Conversations and negotiations are going to happen in Jeddah next week between Russia, Ukraine, and the US. Europe is nowhere on the agenda. So I think in light of this, Europe and European Commission in particular had to be seen to be doing something. So they've gone ahead and agreed on this ambitious package with the possible exception of Hungary, which stayed out. So the question really now is, how soon can this be put into practice? Will member states be able to come up with the funds? And there is also some talk of how to unfreeze the amount of Russian money that's been frozen. An amount of $200 billion has been frozen of Russian assets in Europe alone. And there is some talk of using that interest, which has already been done. But can you unfreeze this amount as well? So Europe will do everything to really come up with the goods, because this is really an existential challenge. And for a change, I'm using the word knowing full well the significance of that word. The bottom line is European Union has for the last 80 years been used to American security guarantee. They are used to cheap energy from Russia, and they had access to the absolutely unlimited Chinese market for goods and services. Suddenly, all three have turned out to be problems for the EU. The American security guarantee is in doubt. Russia invaded Ukraine, so Russian energy is a problem because of sanctions, and the Chinese slowdown in the market means that Europe cannot export as much to China as before. So it's a real triple whammy that the European Union is facing. It couldn't have come at a worse moment, but I think they're doing everything in their power to know that this has to be done. I think what is more significant is that the trust of the transatlantic relationship has been broken, and I'm not sure it can be restored anytime soon.
Right. Do you feel, Ambassador Kumar, that we will now see a different global order? As you've said, European Union has always relied on US guarantees for security. Donald Trump has made it very clear, you need to increase defense spending. You did not spend enough money on Ukraine. We did. When you have a president of this kind who is saying that the European Union has been screwing us, with those kind of statements in the backdrop, is it quite clear that Europe and European countries are now on their own, and we are going to see a very different global order in the next 5 to 10 years?
Without a doubt. I think any analyst, any observer of the geopolitical scene today will have to say that the old liberal international order is dead. There is no way you can revive the liberal international order. What is not clear is that we will eventually move to a multipolar world order. The question is, what kind of a multipolar world order? Will there be rules of the game? How many poles will you have? Who will occupy those poles? After all, European Union was expected to occupy a pole, but will they be able to do it? Those, I think, are the questions. I think in the near term, you will find that it is going to be very, very messy. I suspect Trump's own thinking leans towards spheres of influence. I think he wants US to dominate the Western hemisphere, which is why he's doing what he's doing in Panama, which is why he's trying to do something with Canada and Mexico and so on. He will, of course, also have an interest in the Western Pacific. Russia will, I think, have at least a limited sphere of influence in Europe. And the million-dollar question, which has a lot of implications for India, is whether China will get its own sphere of influence in East Asia. So if this trifurcation of the world happens, and it's hypothetical, if this happens, then I think we are looking at some balance of power, which may, as you say, in 5 years, 10 years take place, and the world may see some stability. But if not, I think we're going to see a situation where you have US, China, Russia, three powers, but then you have a bunch of middle powers which will try to jostle for space, which will try to be swing states, and it becomes really, really messy and difficult to predict.
Right. Now, when it comes to Ukraine and ending the war, we saw some tense exchanges between Ukraine and US at the White House, between Zelensky and President Trump. It seemed everything had broken, but then it seemed UK, the European Union, everybody went back to the table and said we need to find a way to peace. Do you get a sense that things are now moving in the direction of ending the war? The European Union will also realize that US is not going to bear the cost of this war now for very long. In fact, it has suspended aid already. And somewhere, if they need to save their economies in future, protect themselves, they need to end this war as well?
I think you are spot on, Parikshit. I don't think the US is going to continue to underwrite this war anymore. I think Europeans know that as well. I see a two-stage process that the Americans will now negotiate in Jeddah between the Russian delegation and the Ukrainian delegation. The first part of this two-step process will be to get a kind of ceasefire which will at least apply to air, to the seas, and to prevention of Russian attacks on energy infrastructure in Ukraine. Land ceasefire is going to be problematic. That will probably take a little bit of time. The more important question is, you cannot see the ceasefire holding without two things. One, you need some peacekeepers on the ground. And the European countries like France, but also UK, which is not part of EU, but is still European, both countries have said we will put peacekeepers on the ground in Ukraine to guard the peace. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov has categorically rejected this and said they will not accept peacekeepers. So that part of the deal is yet to be negotiated. Meanwhile, there is a discussion of nuclear deterrence in Europe. Germany says to France that I think we would like your nuclear deterrence to be extended to us. That completely changes the equilibrium in France, in Europe, and to Russia. Predictably, the Russians have said this is an important threat for us if the nuclear deterrence of France is made available to allies in Europe. So all in all, you are seeing a Europe in flux. You are seeing a Europe which has been actually completely unloaded into uncertainty because of the Trump administration, and you're seeing a Europe that's pretty much on its own, as you said.
All right, Ambassador Kumar, we've completely run out of time, but thank you very much for joining us on the program, giving us your view on the fast-changing global order and a few choices that Europe has now been left with. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18 for more news and updates.